everybody, and welcome to Tiger Sidelines Zoom style on MC22. I'm Bo Bayman, joined as always by Dave Matter and Gabe DeArmond. Glad you could join us. We will talk basketball and a great escape last night. We'll talk about the Bradley game, but let's start with the football game. Not a good one down at Mississippi State, 51-32, the final score. The Bulldogs win, and really, there aren't many games that turn early, Dave, but I thought this one did. Up 7-0, Missouri forces Mississippi State to punt. Disaster ensues and really turned the whole game in the first quarter.
It really did. And as poorly as Missouri played on both sides of the ball, you're right. The special teams disaster there really just seemed to set the tone. I mean, Mississippi, I was there. Mississippi State players were fired up. They were, even before the game, you're watching kind of the body language down the field, and they looked like this game meant something. I'm not sure who convinced them of that, but they sure played like that. And once Missouri got down, they just didn't respond very well. They looked like a team that was ready to pack it in and move to the offseason. Now, they did have a little bit of a surge there in the third quarter. Some turnovers went their way, and then turnovers went the other way. And after that, it was just too little too late.
Gabe, it's surprising that on the last game of the season, they played probably their worst game of the season, but maybe it's just exhaustion. I heard, Eli Drinkowitz say, hey, we made it to the finish line, and it sounded like this was an exhausted football team.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of an excuse because, like, Mississippi State was dealing with the same thing, like Dave said. So, you don't want to just explain it away by saying, they were worn out and tired by the season. But they did look like a team that kind of felt like it had proven what it had to prove at that point. And once Mississippi State, like Dave said, made a little run, I mean, there was a minute there where it looked like Missouri might get back into it. They got a takeaway, and then Bazelak gave it back 2 plays later. And it's just, when you're a limited team, it's hard to win when your quarterback plays poorly. And he played, I thought, by far his worst game of the season.
I was just going to touch on that, and let's expound on that. I mean, he's been so good off of the bench. I mean, after the first couple games, but Connor was just was not on Saturday.
And it might have been, leftover from the injuries. It might have been a number of things, but yeah, you could just tell from the outset, like, they look good on the first drive, and then he just didn't have it. He was missing open guys. He was throwing picks that he hasn't thrown most of the season. And they just, kind of like the Georgia game, honestly, there wasn't a whole lot to break down about that game. It was over mid-third quarter, and they just got beat by a team that on that day was better. Now, against Georgia, it made a little more sense because Georgia's going to be better on almost every day. Mississippi State was a team that came in and they'd won 1 game since LSU, and that was a close game against Vanderbilt. And, you thought Missouri would have a little bit more in them for that one.
And Dave, you've talked about this as well. A couple of plays swing different, and Missouri is a 3-win team. They finished 5-5, but really 2 plays go different, and it's 3-7.
Well, they're a lot closer to 3-7 than 7-3 because in all of their losses, those were all games that weren't close. I mean, even the games against the teams that aren't very good, Tennessee and Mississippi State, those were double-digit leads, and so it depends on how you want to look at this. Are you the optimist who says, hey, they're only picked to win 2 or 3 and they ended up with 5? That's great. That's progress. And I think most reasonable people feel that way. But nobody that watched this 10-game season, thinks, man, this team is just a player 2 away from really challenging Georgia or Florida, because they just never were. They got by with what they had to have a 500 season. And you get to the end of it, and that's kind of what they looked like. A tough 10-game slate. By every standard, because they didn't play non-conference games. But let's face it, the SEC wasn't this year what most people expect it to be every year. But it was fine, just considering the circumstance or considering the expectations, which you always have to factor in. This was a good regular season, but nothing to where you could expect Missouri to go into next year and be a contender for the East. They're just not there yet.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And as we look back on this 5-5 season, Gabe, I think maybe, I know the LSU in name win was big, but I think maybe the best game that Missouri played may have been Kentucky.
Yeah. That makes sense. They dominated that game. The scoreboard said it was only 20-10, but it never felt that close. That and South Carolina probably were their two best, but I'm not sure they put together a full game where you thought the offense and the defense both look good at the same time, right? I mean, their two best wins were Arkansas and LSU, and honestly, they did that almost exclusively on offense with the defense that just kind of was hanging on and made a big play at the right time. So I think if you take it as a whole, if you go back and I'm big on what did you think out of this team in August? And if I had told you then 5-5, they're going to beat LSU, Kentucky, and South Carolina, you'd have said, cool, I'm good. Don't even play the season. Just give me that today and I'll take it. And that's what they did. So, it's a little hollow when you're 5-3 and you end 5-5 with two blowouts, but I don't think you can qualify this as anything but a success in year one.
And they're rewarded by a trip to the Music City Bowl. And as you guys have explained, since Sunday, they wanted the Music City Bowl. Yes, Florida is attractive, but for families traveling and for other reasons, they wanted the Music City Bowl, and they get a matchup hopefully against Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, a Florida Bowl this year doesn't really mean anything because you can't go out and enjoy Disney World or the beaches or anything like that because of COVID. So if you're going to get a location out of the way in your rotation that maybe isn't the most exotic, we'll do it this year because you're not going to see anything but your hotel and in the stadium anyway. And I know, and I've heard from some parents and players this week alone that, that Florida would have been nice, sure, but they're grateful that they don't have to, the ones that live here in the Midwest or not too far away, they don't have to worry about going to an airport right now and getting on a plane. They can just hop in the car, and it's not the easiest drive, but it's a lot easier than going to Florida or risking getting on an airplane when people don't want to do that right now necessarily. So it made sense from that aspect. It's also an earlier game, and this team looks like they just kind of want to get it over with, move on to the offseason and start preparing for 2021.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it's a tough customer. If Iowa is able to play, Gabe, which as we sit here is sort of up in the air because they've got COVID running through their coaching staff and some of their players. If they have to play Iowa, that'll be a tough game because the Hawkeyes have run off what I believe 6 straight wins.
Yeah, if they have to play the Iowa team that played this season. The truth is, this is going to be like a JV game for both teams. I mean, Larry Borum is going pro. Nick Bolton is going pro. We still don't know, what the health of some of Missouri's players is. I promise Iowa has guys that are injured or have COVID or are opting out. They're going to be down a handful of starters. I think I'll be honest, guys. I don't really get why they're having games like this. Play the playoffs, play the New Year's Six Bowls with the big checks if you want. But these other games to me don't make much sense. I mean, the reward is always the trip and getting to play this team that you don't play a lot. And I don't see a whole lot of reward in this for players.
I think that might be what the players are feeling too. Yeah, it's cool to go to the nice hotel in Nashville and it's cool to get the gifts, but do we really have to play another game?
Well, and let me correct myself. I do understand why they're playing this game. They're playing all these games because ESPN says we need bowl games to put on television. They're playing all these games for the same reason they played all the games they played before this. But
yeah, and Gabe, you mentioned the guys that have opted out, said, hey, you know what, I'm going to not play in the bowl game. One guy I thought would opt out, but he didn't, was Larry Roundtree, Dave. He said, I'm going to play with these guys.
Yeah, it's important to him. I think also, and not saying that this makes him selfish or anything at all, but he's really close to 1,000 yards. And the way that he's played lately, he could get that. And I think that would be just another kind of feather in his cap as he ends his career at Missouri. If he faces the Iowa defense that it was for the regular season, that's going to be hard to do. They're one of the best rush defenses in the country. And he's also a guy he's not like Nick Bolton, who's projected as a first-round NFL draft pick. He's got something that he can go out there, and this game's not going to determine necessarily where he's drafted, but it can certainly help. And, just to add another game to his resume and, good for him. I mean, I don't fault any of the players that want to sit out, especially the draft prospects. I mean, what does this game mean to them? Especially guys like Borum, who's in an injury this year. And we know Bolton has been playing banged up. That's their choice. And I think they're going to get support from their teammates and coaches to do that. But also you salute the guys like Larry Roundtree who want to play one more game and see what they can do.
Nick Bolton, Gabe, he's going to be a probably mid to late first rounder. He's going to make a lot of money. It makes perfect sense that he's not going to play in this game.
I mean, what's Nick Bolton going to prove in this game? Go out and make 17 tackles and everybody says, oh yeah, I saw you do that another time. And look, he's not healthy. If you watched him the last 3 games of the season, he was not the same player. I mean, there was a play in that Mississippi State game where he was chasing after Will Rogers and he was just kind of keeping pace with him. And Nick Bolton is faster than Will Rogers when he's healthy. So the key for him now, he's got to get healthy for the NFL Combine, because that's his lifetime dream job interview. And I know fans have a hard time understanding this, but the Music City Bowl really isn't his lifetime dream. It's the NFL. And I think Nick Bolton, it's interesting the different reception different kids get, but it's hard to have asked Nick Bolton to give anything more to this football program than he gave over the last 3 years. And that's not to diminish what Larry Borum gave either, but they are going to be viewed a little bit differently, as unfair as that is.
We're going to take next week off, so we won't necessarily preview the game, but just talking about Missouri and Iowa, and if they were matched up, Dave, the way maybe 4 weeks ago, you'd have to give Iowa the nod, right?
Yeah, and then they are a classic Kirk Ferentz Iowa team. I mean, they run the ball and they stop the run. They're really physical. They've got big, huge guys up front on both sides of the ball. They've got the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year on their defensive tackles. Now, who knows if he'll play in the game because he's a draft prospect. But at full strength, yeah, I think you give Iowa the edge just because they're built kind of in the way that Georgia is, and Missouri struggled with that style. What Eli Drinkwitz say after the game? What's the difference between you and Georgia right now? He said the trenches, both sides of the line of scrimmage. That would favor Iowa in this game, and I think that's why you're seeing Iowa as a favorite. I think 14 points, biggest point spread in the SEC for bowl games. But like Gabe said, we don't know what these teams are going to look like. They could have a handful of walk-ons out there, and then you throw out all the expectations. You don't know how that ball's going to bounce against two teams that aren't themselves.
That game is on December 30th. That's a Wednesday, and it's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we will talk about it in a couple of weeks. Let's take a break. When we come back, a great escape on the basketball court. We'll talk about that and more right here on Tiger Sidelines on MC22. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tiger Sidelines on MC22. Happy holidays alongside Dave Matter and Gabe DeArmond. I'm Bo Bayman. We switch to the hardwood now, and what a game between Bradley and the 14th ranked Missouri Tigers last night. You want to talk about a slugfest is what it turned into, mainly because Missouri couldn't score for a long stretch of that game, but they come back from 8 down in the final three plus minutes and get a bucket and one from Jeremiah Tillman with 1 second left to pull out a 54-53 win. It's a character win, but it's one of those that going into the game, you didn't expect to be a character win, I would say, Gabe.
Yeah, you know what, Bradley, I was pretty impressed with Bradley. I mean, they've got a 7'1" dude that he's way more coordinated than most 7-footers. They're athletic, they play quick, they play good defense. Now, it doesn't excuse shooting 25.4%, right? But in the end, I think Bradley's got an excellent shot to be an NCAA tournament team. And nobody on Selection Sunday, and I understand that Missouri fans have a hard time thinking this way because it's been a minute since we've had to really care about that. But like nobody on Selection Sunday is going to go, I don't know. They were down 8 against Bradley with 3:44 left. 0 people on that committee are going to know that. They're going to look and go, they beat Bradley. Good win.
Don't you think that that's one when it does come to March? I think Bradley might be a team that nobody wants to play, Dave. You see the matchup and you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, and the good thing for Missouri is they've got the battle scars now to remind them when that situation comes up again against a good SEC team, assuming there are good SEC teams. I'm not sure there are many. Whether it's Arkansas or Alabama or whoever, they can remind themselves, hey, remember the Bradley game? We were down 8 with a couple minutes to go and pulled it out. It was ugly. I mean, I was sitting safely 6 feet to Gabe's right during the game, and I declared that game over about 10 times in the last 10 minutes because Missouri just couldn't get a shot. They couldn't get anything going. All they could do was get to the free throw line. And then when they had a chance to get to the free throw line, they take a three. Just terrible Mark Smith free. But they found a way. They needed a missed free throw, the front end of the one-on-one there, and then almost committed a backcourt violation. I mean, it could have gone wrong so many ways for Missouri, and instead everything went right. And the officials let them play in that game pretty much for 40 minutes. And the one whistle Missouri needed, they got. Jeremiah Tillman makes a free throw, and everybody goes home happy.
And Gabe, you talked about this last week on the show, and you said Xavier Pinson is the guy they want to have the basketball when it's crunch time and down the stretch. And they almost committed that backcourt violation to get him the ball. And then he makes the play in the sweet dish to Tillman, but he was the one that started it and created with under 10 seconds to go.
Yeah, and Mark Smith, he's been really good for this team, but man, he made a couple of what's happening here plays in the last 10 seconds last night. But yeah, Pinson, it was interesting. I rewatched that play, and like in a lot of games, they call a charge on Pinson after he tossed the pass to Tillman. I mean, it was a good play, and it was consistent with how they called the game all night. I mean, they let those guys go, and that was a basketball game that I enjoyed watching because we weren't parading to the free throw line every 6 seconds, and so I thought they let the players decide the game. He definitely made a play, but for 15 minutes, Jeremiah Tillman were good for Missouri, and that was it. I mean, there was nothing else that Missouri had going last night.
Another guy I want to touch on, he's so important to the team and has to stay out of foul trouble. Drew Smith was a non-factor last night. I mean, he picked up his 4th foul with about 12 minutes to go.
For all the Heat fans want to give Tillman for his foul trouble, where is it for Drew Smith? I mean, he gets fouls 90 feet from the basket. He got the second one last night. He needs to pick that up. I mean, part of the reason he gets so many steals, I think he led the SEC in steals last year, is he does kind of slap at you, and he tries to get the ball away from you. Back off on that a little bit. One more steal per game is not worth him having to sit on the bench for so long. Now, give him credit. He had a huge rebound there on the missed free throw. Smallest guy out there, second smallest to Pinson, and he pulls down that rebound and he gets him to go. But again, great for this team that they can survive a night where Drew Smith is barely a factor and Mark Smith is barely a factor. And Javon Pickett, I don't think he scored, did he? He didn't have a field goal. To be able to win, and that's why they were in the 50s because no one scored except for the 2 guys. But when you can win like that, you're doing something right.
And they're now 6-0. And as they always say, it's better to learn off of a win, which they'll do, because now they get thrown right into the SEC schedule again on December 30th. That'll be a big day with the bowl game. And then the SEC opener against one of the better teams in the SEC in Tennessee. Gabe, that's a tough one right off the bat.
I mean, I think if you look at it rationally, if you look at these 14 teams and your paycheck doesn't come for maybe covering a team that used to be rivals with one of them, you've got to think these are the 2 best teams in the SEC. I mean, this is an early look, winning this game doesn't mean a whole lot in the conference race, but you go into this game probably thinking, hey, this is a little early season barometer. If Tennessee is really what we think it is, and that's the best team in this league, and it's maybe not particularly close, then they go win a road game to start this thing. And if Missouri is really what they've looked to be so far, they do this at home. If it was in Knoxville, you might look at it a little differently. But if you want to have serious talks about winning the league, this is the type of game you need to win.
Is this layoff now? I mean, they had a layoff before the game against Bradley. Now they have another layoff. I mean, they're playing one game in about practically 3 weeks, Dave. Is that going to help?
So it didn't look like it helped last night. I did think that Konzo kind of learned his lesson a little bit. Now, granted, they were supposed to play a game last Friday, and it got canceled. And by then, it's too late to add anybody. The NCAA has this rule, too, that during your winter break, you have to have 3 consecutive days off where they can't even watch film. They can't do anything together as a team. Well, that has to come this coming week. So Konzo doesn't want to add a game because then you have to practice for that game. Plus, you need to practice for Tennessee, and you just can't do that with 3 days off, plus the holiday. So they're kind of in a bind. He did say last night they should have had a full scrimmage with officials to simulate a game. I don't know why you can't do that still just in practice and have your assistant coaches wear masks and be the officials. So whatever, it's kind of logistics. But yeah, they need to do something because you can't come out and start a game 0-8 against Tennessee. Tennessee right now, their schedule isn't as good as Missouri's, but they've scored in the hundreds their last 2 games. They can score some points, and they beat Cincinnati and Colorado, 2 decent teams to begin the year. So this is obviously a huge test.
And Tennessee is getting a little bit healthier as they go along, which is certainly a factor. Let's talk about the women's basketball team. Boy, they played a lot. They've won 3 in a row. They won 3 games in 5 days, beating Oral Roberts, Southern Illinois to this past weekend. The team has looked better. And as we predicted when they lost to Missouri State, we said this is a team that needs to get in some games and get into a rhythm. And it seems, at least this past weekend, they did get into a rhythm finally.
And look, I'm not going to pretend to have studied the women's RPI, but it might not hurt to play Oral Roberts in Southern Illinois if you're looking to maybe get a little early season something going. So we'll see what this team is when SEC play starts, which I assume again is pretty close. I mean, it's everybody's clock is off that does what we do this time of year, because we've got signing day and a regular season football game, and bragging rights was 2 weeks ago. Nobody can figure out what time of the year it is.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the SEC opener is the next game. They'll take on Alabama. They'll host Alabama, but it's not till New Year's Eve. It's Thursday, December 31st at 2:00. So interesting for Robin Pinson, Dave, that she has time now to work with her squad after going 3 games in 5 days.
It's just so weird. You usually have the non-conference to kind of find yourself, to develop your identity, figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then you can dive into SEC play with a little better idea of who you are. Well, I don't think they're there yet. I mean, they haven't really been tested by a great team. Missouri State's good. They're nationally ranked, but it's going to be a lot different SEC play, and it's fair to expect them to have a slow start. But if they get some early wins, build a little confidence, figure out who they are somewhat, then maybe they can surprise some people.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's go back to football just for a minute before we wrap up, and let's do the semifinals. Number 4 Notre Dame really got pounded by Clemson in the ACC championship. They'll take on Alabama. I don't see any way Notre Dame beats Alabama unless Alabama beats itself.
Yeah, the college football is like watching an episode of 24 where you're like, I mean, he's almost gotten murdered 27 times and he can't walk and his heart stopped 5 minutes ago and he has 29 guys shooting at him. But like, I know this is going to end with him killing all the bad guys in Clemson and Alabama playing for the national title, right? I knew that last November that Clemson and Alabama were going to play for the national title in 2020. I've said this for a few years. If your goal is just, hey, I like my team, I want to see how many games they can win, I want to tailgate with some buddies, I like Saturdays, college football is a great sport. If your goal is, I want to see my team play for a title, college football is the dumbest thing that exists anywhere for a sports fan. I mean, there is no point for 90% of the teams and probably more.
Good to see Gabe is well-versed in Jack Bauer. No doubt about that.
I've actually been streaming that the last couple of weeks, and we were, and my wife said, did people like this show when it was on? I said, well, it's good, kind of mindless entertainment, but it's a little dumb.
Yeah, and so the other one is Ohio State and Clemson. They bend the rules in the Big Ten to get Ohio State in. Ohio State struggles with Northwestern, but finally ends up winning. And so can Ohio State beat Clemson, Dave?
Well, if Clemson's winning after 4 quarters, can the Big Ten invent a new rule that you get to play 5 quarters? Because I just assume they will. I mean, they've changed every other rule to get Ohio State in this game. So Clemson's a better team. Ohio State, why are they in the playoff? Is it just because of who they are? If Purdue had Ohio State's 6 wins, would Purdue be playing in the playoff right now? I don't think so, because with the big wins over Indiana and Northwestern. So no, I mean, I don't think all the arguing, it's not going to matter. Like Gabe said, Clemson and Alabama are clearly the best teams with a healthy Trevor Lawrence. I should say healthy, but with not a COVID infected Trevor Lawrence. And I'm looking forward to that game, but we got to get through the semifinals, I guess.
Well, and I actually heard a really good point on this. Like, Ohio State's basically had like 5 bye weeks during the season.
Yeah.
Isn't this kind of a big advantage for them to come in having 5 fewer weeks of wear and tear on all these guys? It's another reason they shouldn't be in.
They barely beat Northwestern though, with 5 bye weeks.
Yeah, and if there was ever a year to mix it up and throw somebody in there like a Cincinnati, it would have been this year, but they didn't do it. All right, since we're going to take next week off, we just wanted to thank everybody. Want to say happy holidays to everybody. We'll watch those games. We'll watch Iowa and Missouri as long as they play in the bowl game. We'll watch the bowl game. We'll watch the SEC opener on the basketball court between Tennessee and Missouri, and we'll be back in the new year to talk about it. Guys, I want to say Merry Christmas and thanks as always for everything you do. That's Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter. I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks as always to Matt and Brian behind the scenes. And thank you for watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. We'll see you next time.